Hi there, I'm Tshiamo Malatji. Welcome to the third Climate Justice Charter Movement webinar. I'm just going to open up with this short video made by the collective movement.
Know what climate justice is? Yes.
Yes. Yes.
I think the climate justice is kind of making sure that resources like clean air and clean water, as well as like land reform, and just kind of on the fundamental level of government things, and just, yeah, I think that encompasses it, as well as kind of everyday things that we do, and yeah.
What does climate justice mean to you?
Peace. Yeah, I think amongst other things, it means peace.
Justice mean to you?
Climate justice is the intersection of the environment and social justice. It means taking care of the environment and combating climate change in a way that also deals with social issues and people affected by climate change on a social level.
Climate justice means social justice because I believe climate justice really does intersect with a lot of other social issues, and who it affects really does depend on your standpoint within society. And
fighting for change in the environment and like to fix the environment, but also to fix the effects that it has on people, because it's all interlinked with different social issues.
How much does climate change affect you on a daily basis?
I think a lot more than I realize and understand. I think for me, the first thing that I can see is how it already in a society with such a large wealth gap, I'm able to understand in that context more, because it's obviously the richer the more wealthy, who will be able to bid for resources as they become more scarce and of less good quality.
I think it affects all of us, including myself, a lot. Like just thinking about what we take in on a normal day, but also I think it affects different people, different amounts, and often the ones who are like more affected is because of the actions of the ones who are less affected.
How does climate change make you feel in terms of anxiety or stress?
I think in terms of anxiety and stress, I'm more scared for like my generation and future generations having to deal with all the effects. But even more than anxiety, I'm more just like angry with past generations for not listening to the science behind climate change and making the change that they should have done like years ago.
Really anxious. I was talking to my dad about this last night, and I started crying because it's just a really freaky thing to think about. I think we all have hopes and dreams for our future, and we all stress out about things, but this is another level to that, and it's something that we feel more imminent.
knowing that perpetrators of climate change are not taking accountability for the work, it just makes me feel even more hopeless for people who are getting most affected.
What steps do you think can be taken to combat climate change to achieve climate justice?
I think the first step that needs to be taken is the understanding of the masses that climate change is the fault of large corporations, and it's not something that was caused by individuals, nor is something that can be fixed by that. That being said, I think the first step that needs to be taken is more people understanding the severity of climate change, and then implementing policies within government such as renewable energy sources and protecting endangered species.
Hold corporations accountable, because they are like the largest offenders in terms of climate change through like greenhouse gas emissions and like not getting rid of waste properly. So if we hold them accountable, I think it'll be much easier to like then go through other steps like bringing the issues to a forefront, like I said before, and also like providing aid to victims of climate change, people who have been in droughts or floods.
How do you think we should combat climate change and push for climate action?
I think that climate action is a multifaceted thing, so we have to do it on the kind of personal level of us incorporating things into our daily routine, like long driving to school or stuff like that, and those kind of daily things that we can incorporate, as well as on the fundamental level within governments and kind of pushing for sustainability to our whole society, especially through companies and kind of every day.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tshiamo Malatji. I'm an organizer here in Bloemfontein, working with the Climate Justice Charter movement. This is the third webinar in our series, Climate Justice Charter Movement webinar series. The first webinar was about renewable energy. The second webinar was about land reform. Today's webinar, as you caught a taste of in the video we've just seen, is going to be about young people and the climate crisis. Before we get into that, why are we here? Because we've created something called the Climate Justice Charter. This is our plan to end hunger, thirst, and pollution and other forms of climate breakdown here in South Africa, moving away from large corporations that control land, water, and food production and various forms of fossil fuels, energy-intensive ways of life, toward a people-centered movement using eco-socialism, social ownership, participatory budgeting, and democracy to create a much better way of life. This is a document we adopted in October last year when the Climate Justice Charter movement was founded. Before that, there was about 6 years of activism by the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign, and also working with the Cooperative Policy Alternative Center, COPAC. You can follow the Climate Justice Charter movement on social media or COPAC SA on social media. We're also collecting signatories, people joining in our vision. We've already put out a petition that has been endorsed by over 200 organizations and thousands of individuals. And we're asking you to join us in our vision and also adding your name or the name of your organization to the charter. A link has been sent in the chat box here in the webinar, which you can use to sign the petition. You'll see the petition looks like this. It's hosted on amandla.mobi. You can just easily fill in these details, sign, and we're also asking you to share it with the people you know in your community, because doing that makes sure that the Climate Justice Charter spreads, and so does our vision. Today, we're specifically going to be talking about young people, because the Climate Justice Charter is also about various forms of justice. Climate justice, of course, social justice, human justice, but also intergenerational justice, caring for generations current and in the future. And that's embedded into the principles that are established in this charter. So today we're going to be joined by a young group of people. They call themselves the Collective Movement. And the Collective Movement is an intersectional youth-based organization focused on creating awareness among youth about the climate crisis. They've got a few wonderful members who'll be joining us this evening. We've got Yakani Charlotte Giaco, who's an 18-year-old scholar based in Johannesburg, Les, a 20-year-old comm design and photography student and climate activist from Pretoria, Natalie Capsosideris, an 18-year-old intersectional climate activist studying microbiology in Pretoria, Sarah Farista, a 17-year-old intersectional environmental activist and scholar from Johannesburg, Skylar Thornton, a 19-year-old environmental activist studying earth sciences in Stellenbosch, and Tariro Banganai, a 19-year-old climate activist currently studying biology in Cape Town. Thank you, the 6 of you, for joining me this evening, and hello to all of you. Okay, so that's them. I suppose we're just going to move along to the first kind of important discussion here, and that's just to find out from you, what exactly is the Collective Movement? What do you do to avert the climate crisis, and what are your goals?
Hi, okay, cool. So the Collective Movement is a youth-based organization, meaning all of the people who are part of our movement were either in university or were in school, were fully run by young people. And we're an intersectional organization focused on climate justice specifically as a form of justice that we want to achieve for South Africa. And specifically to get there, we want to try and achieve that by empowering the youth and creating awareness about what climate justice means among the youth in an intersectional manner, meaning we have a big focus on how different social issues intersect and how climate justice not only achieves justice environmentally, but also, socioeconomically, gender-wise, race-wise, all sorts of different ways that climate justice achieves this. And we mainly use social media, so Instagram, Twitter, as our main platforms for justice, because of course we started last year, in the beginning of last year. So we had, I think, one in-person strike, and then lockdown happened, and we moved a lot of our efforts over social media. But yeah, I think it's been just over a year and we've been doing quite well, I guess. I don't know, I'm stoked for us. We're so cool, yes.
So Natalie, you've mentioned the word intersectionality a lot, and thank you for explaining it as well. Why is intersectionality such an important approach by the collective movement?
Okay, so I think specifically why we chose intersectionality as like our main faucet or our main like, I guess, view or of how we're going to achieve activism is because it's so important to understand that, you know, problems don't exist in isolation. You're not just going to get like the natural disaster that happens and that's just a problem by itself. You need to look at how it affects different people in that society. Does it affect everyone equally? And also, in order to adequately mitigate the climate crisis as well as actually deal with it, you need to look at things via an intersectional lens, because then you're actually able to achieve justice in its totality. So if you just say, okay, well, we want to reduce emissions, then okay, cool, you can have the same system that we have now, but on renewable energy, you're still going to have the same systemic issues. And the people that would have been negatively affected by the climate crisis are still going to be in those same positions. You haven't actually solved the issue. So that's why we chose intersectionality.
And can you also help me understand, Natalie, what are some of the things you've done exactly? You say you've been around for a year, you know, what are some of the minor victories? Where are you at right now?
Cool. So I guess we've done quite a few things. As I say, most of it has been online because, you know, we've been very limited. So the very first thing we did was we had an inter-school climate justice march. That's actually how the collective started. So we had people from various schools around South Africa hosting their own marches around the perimeter of their school, aimed at raising awareness and, you know, platforming the youth and saying, hey, like, we know our future's in danger. We know our government isn't protecting us. Let's talk about this. We've done quite a few other things. We've run projects with other youth-based organizations centered around like Pan-Africanism, gender-based violence. We do quite a lot of lives where we discuss really important issues with regards to climate justice and intersectionality on Instagram to try and, you know, in an effort to get more people interested. We've also, we've done quite a lot of that kind of stuff. And then we've also, at various marches that have happened, we've had our youth, represented there, which was great. So yeah, that's the basic rundown of everything.
Oh, well, it sounds like exciting stuff. I want to jump on from that answer to a different question now. I just want to find out why social media is so important for youth-based climate activism and in what ways we can avoid, because your article that you've written in the Daily Maverick speaks a lot about how a lot of the focus online is on Western narratives, or the term you use is whitewashed narratives. So in what ways does the collective avoid that through the online sphere? And then why is the online sphere so important for young people?
So the way we try to avoid the sort of I guess the whitewashing of information or the whitewashing of the entire climate crisis is by pointing out, given that we're an African country, we need to point out the sort of disparities that we come across when in regards to intersectionality. So pointing out issues like women's rights in South Africa, general human rights, and how, for example, like xenophobia is a really big issue in South Africa, and how we can't just sort of ignore other African countries and focus on on South Africa alone. So it's very important for us to outline that specifically. And also within the media, it's a big problem of how they sort of whitewash information on focusing on European countries and their issues, or how their activists are doing great work, or a lot of activists are doing amazing work in global South countries, in so many other affected countries around the world. And I think the sort of calling, for example, like one of the most prominent activists, for example, in like South Africa, or like in India, the Greta Thunberg of this country is such a big issue, because like while Greta's great, these people are their own individuals with their own climate activism work. And to sort of, I don't want to say downscale, but to sort of put their activism into this box of just pointing to one person and saying, yeah, they're this person. It takes away from the individuality of their work and the hard work that goes into the sort of hard work that goes into the time as well, that goes into sort of essentially putting your entire youth into your activism. And the way social media is so, I guess, the way information flies on social media, it's so important for us to make sure the information that we're sharing on social media doesn't sort of get, I don't want to, I'd say I want to use the word commodified, or sort of used as just this overall like information box, like, yeah, this is the issue within one Instagram infographic, for example. And it's such a big problem of how information or important information or key information is not being elaborated or given enough context, and those kinds of things are so easy to be used as a weapon against other activists who are quote unquote not given enough coverage, or it's like, well, why aren't you doing this or this or this, for example. So
I actually want to ask you on that, Liz. You're talking about putting a lot of information into one post, into one infographic. How does your movement avoid misinformation or misleading people?
So yeah, we do a lot of occasionally we do put like informational graphics or anything that's important up on our story, for example, or we post that stuff, but we've dialed back on a lot of the sort of very just dense informational stuff because they don't give enough context into what the entire climate crisis is. We more use them as references now to larger and better information. So they're more introductory things than anything. So we don't try to sort of say, yeah, here's the issue and you can read about it more here. It's sort of like it's like here's the base of the issue and here's the foundation of the issue. There's so much more that you can read about here and here, and which is why we try to do more of these things, these more conversational things in which a person can give the context straight away, or can reference, or can be more sort of referential into other informational things. That way we don't sort of fall into the box of just sharing, I guess, the context, because it's so easy to just take something off of Instagram and then strip all the context away from it, either from the caption or with all the information there. So it's so important for us to make sure that what we're sharing is beneficial and informational, and not just, I guess, for the sake of engagement. Because as important as engagement is with the issue, we don't want to just, you know, become another Instagram account. We are a full organization putting in work and having these sort of conversations and actions to make sure that people get involved physically and sort of become more engaged physically with these issues. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. And of course, we're happy that we're having this kind of long form conversation to break down the issues. Now let's move away from talking just about the online sphere. The article that the collective movement wrote also spoke out about how people are showing up for protests, people are forming organizations, young people. So I want to find out from the movement, you know, what's causing more young people to pay attention to the climate crisis, show up for protests and organize? What's happening now in South Africa that's making more people participate? And for the young people that aren't participating yet, why is it so important that they get involved as well?
Hi, so I think social media plays a big role in how many people are getting involved and how many people are aware of the issue. It's a great way and a great tool to like spread information about when current strikes are taking place and protests and what the main issue is and how we can combat the problem. I think a main problem we're facing is that not enough youth are caring, which is detrimental because we are the generation who's going to inhabit the planet, and we should be doing this for the future generations, not only ourselves. So therefore, I think it's really important that we all get involved and we all, first of all, educate ourselves about climate change. The climate literacy rate in South Africa is incredibly low. And I believe that the first step that we can take towards combating this problem is through education. Because once you have education, you have the knowledge to change the world. So, yeah, I think adding climate change into the curriculum, not only just on a surface level basis, but also unpacking the intersections that Natalie and Les brought up earlier, so that everyone is aware and everyone's educated. And once everyone knows about the problem, we can all unite and step forward to create a solution.
Sarah, what do you think are some of the barriers to these education initiatives? Why haven't we seen these changes to the curriculum, even outside of school? Why don't we see a lot more education based on climate change that's also targeting young people? Because your article actually opens up with saying there's a lot of jargon, a lot of language that isn't necessarily appropriate for young people. So why do you think, Sarah, we aren't seeing a massive shift toward that education aspect for young people in particular?
I think it's mainly because this problem has been ignored for so long, and it's been dodged and pushed away, and it's only really being brought to light in the recent 2 years. And I think it's also because the older generation isn't as aware of the climate issue, and they are the ones who are in control of what schools are teaching and what's in the curriculum. So I think the lack of knowledge throughout the generations has caused a huge gap. And in terms of climate change and the terminology being used, a lot of new terms like a just transition, for example, have been brought up, and not everyone is aware of that term. So I think not dumbing down the issue completely, but simplifying it and starting off with the basics and from there building on it it's a big step and a simple step that can be taken.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering why a lot of these steps haven't been taken. A big part of your article, and even the discussion we're having right now, is on intersectionality. And I want to ask about the South African climate justice movement in particular. Is there enough focus on global South context? I know a bit earlier we were speaking a lot about how there's not a lot of focus in media. So I also want to know about the South African climate movement, the movement that's existing right now of young people. Is it inclusive? Are we seeing an accurate reflection of the kind of way that you want the movement to exist? On this webinar, you've been speaking about how the movement should be. I just want to know the situation on the ground. Does it reflect how the movement should be? Are we actually seeing an inclusive, intersectional climate justice movement, not just your organization, but inclusively across the country?
Currently, not at the moment. I don't think there's enough inclusivity within the movement. However, I do think we are moving towards that slowly but surely, taking steps to include everyone by involving those who are going to be most deeply affected by the problem, and involving them in the actions that are taking place and getting their voices amplified within the movement. However, it's still not 100% there yet. However, through steps like with protests and with involving as many people as possible, we are moving towards an inclusive movement with inclusive representation.
I want to also move on to this, the kind of movement we're moving toward, as you mentioned. What are some of the challenges organizing young people in South Africa against the climate crisis?
Sorry, I think my audio went off there for a second. Could you repeat the question?
I just want to know from the movement, I don't know if Sarah's going to answer the rest of the questions from here on. What are some of the challenges organizing young people in South Africa against the climate crisis? So, we've spoken a bit about the stubbornness with older people. You've mentioned that education is one thing that young people are lacking. Is that the only challenge? Are there other challenges organizing young people?
I think there definitely are other challenges, but once again, the main problem is just the lack of knowledge. I think a lot of people, while they notice that climate change is an issue and it's there and they see it, they still don't have enough passion and enough enthusiasm to take up spaces and to actually get involved with organizing, with educating other people, with discussing it, and just in general, like involving themselves on a higher level, because it can be very daunting and very overwhelming hearing about climate change and all the intersections and it can evoke a lot of anxiety. So a lot of people, well, from what I found, is they find this issue so scary and, as I said, overwhelming, and they decide to like move away from it and rather be apathetic towards it than engaging with the problem and creating solutions. But as I said, I feel like once we break down the steps, and I feel like that's what the Climate Justice Charter did so incredibly well, is it broke down what climate change was, and it introduced so many solutions, and it explained what a just transition is and how these plans can be implemented, and the government can implement this into our economy and in South Africa, and what solutions that would bring. So yeah,
I like that, Sarah. You know, you can find the Climate Justice Charter online. Just search Climate Justice Charter South Africa. It's hosted on the South African SAFC website, SAFSC, South African Food Sovereignty Campaign. You can also read and share the Climate Justice Charter. It also comes with a nice guide that breaks down lots of the various issues. So if public education is one of the most important things, definitely the Climate Justice Charter is a good place to start. You can also find COPAC SA on YouTube, COPAC, COPAC SA. There's a whole lot of videos explaining the hunger crisis in South Africa, the water commons, down to how you can start your own food garden, really. A whole lot of resources that I think are also appropriate for young people. So for all the people attending this webinar, you can just write your questions in the chat box. If you're attending via Facebook, you can just put a Facebook comment, because we're about to move into the open Q&A session of this webinar. If you have any questions for the collective movement, you can just ask them and they'll be able to answer any of the questions you have about young people specifically and how they're embracing the climate crisis. But I have another question for the collective movement before we move into the public, and that's about the public. How is the message of the climate crisis being received by the public and older decision makers? So I know you've said a bit earlier in this webinar that they aren't really creating the kind of education that we need. They aren't necessarily as aware of the problem, but for the people you have spoken to, for the people that you are making aware, for the people that you pitch solutions to, how has the reception been?
So generally speaking, the public see these opinions as quite far-fetched and unrelatable, if that not urgent, and they kind of have like an air of indifference to it because they don't see themselves as directly affected. Like if people are happy in the status quo, then they don't feel like the effects of climate change affect them, and they don't really care for the message of the climate crisis and of the outcry that we're making. As far as older decision makers go, who essentially make our futures a reality, they are like keenly apathetic and characteristically unable to see the facts and hear the outcry of climate justice. But also, like, in addition to that, it extends to like a second sphere of acknowledgement, but then no follow through, which is quite damaging in terms of that being the case for many examples across the board of politicians promising change and promising that things are going to get better, but then they favor the status quo because of the age-old reason of needing money and continuing to need the support as shareholders of various companies that continue to bleed out Earth dry of resources and continue to feed into climate change. As Sarah said earlier, the problem's been dodged many times, even if it is acknowledged and even if politicians do see it as an issue, they dodge it deliberately because it turns out that they are being benefited in the long run.
Yeah, I see this, you know, either them dodging, not acknowledging, or acknowledging and then not doing anything about it. So what does that mean, Skylar? Does that mean we focus on young people and hope that the next generation of decision makers will do something about the climate crisis? Do we intensify our pressure on politicians? You know, what's the route that we take when they don't respond to us asking nicely?
I think both. I think as well as empowering the youth and continuing to ensure that the youth is like a major voice within this, because at the end of the day, we're going to be the ones who are most affected by it. But at the same time, also increasing the pressure and increasing the amount of activism that we're doing, in terms of actually calling out and holding people and politicians accountable. Not so much that we would be kind of soft in the way that we have done in the past, and not so much that we would be extreme, but increasing the pressure so that they actually are forced to listen.
And I like this, pressure campaigns, reaching out to young people. I want to talk to you, Yakani, about reaching out to young people, because a lot of you are based in different areas: Johannesburg, Pretoria, Stellenbosch, Cape Town. How exactly do we cross these boundaries of space and time? Is that social media? Is that an effective way for us to create a movement across the country that communicates with each other, that works with each other? And then also, do we offer support to each other? So are we at a point in the youth climate-based movement where young people are helping each other out with resources, with information, such that whatever is happening in Johannesburg is also happening in Cape Town and vice versa?
So I think specifically, if I just have to talk about this organization that we're in right now, they have been really, really, really good at communication. And I think, yeah, the one thing that I can commend young people for doing is really being good at communicating. And like in the article, we've said that we see what happens when young people get together for a simple, for a common, for a common cause. And I think it's just that ambition and desire, and even like a little bit of anger at the system and how it's treating climate change and all of that. It just has this incredible power to draw people together across borders, because passion is limitless, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, across borders, does that also mean that there's hopes for an African climate justice movement? I saw in your article, there was like a mention of Africa as well. Are there plans to not only address South African issues, but also continental issues?
So on, I think one of the lives that we had, we were talking to people in other countries in Africa, and we take part in like lots of different little projects, lives, or even like just Zoom sessions where we discuss with other African people these other developments that are going on in their countries. On our Instagram page, there are multiple updates and posts about other climate change situations that are happening in Africa. Like, again, we want to include people, we want to increase our inclusivity. So I don't think it's like plans, we are already doing that. Hopefully we will get more opportunities to expand it further than we are right now, but I think that we're doing quite great.
I mean, that's a lot of good news, especially that you've focused on intersectionality, which includes focusing on fellow African countries as well. I'm going to move to a question we've received from some of the people attending the webinar. So Pumla says, very interesting and great that young people are taking steps toward their better future. How is the movement planning to bridge the gap of education within the different spaces of South Africa where such information or awareness is not available, especially in rural communities? Well, I don't know who's the person who will answer that, but I'm sure any of you can really just jump in and just give some of your comments on that.
I think right now it's just this whole thing of, that the best, us finding ways to almost like infiltrate the system, if you would say. So like I said, it's just that communication thing. So it all just usually would start with just one person at one school deciding to talk about something, just open a a conversation about something, and then someone else at another school wants to open a conversation. So I think, yeah, some of the things is our social media. It does get a mass audience. Unfortunately, because of COVID, there are no like in-person meetings or like mass collaborations, but I think one of the ways that we can kind of reach, especially in the rural areas, is having these open conversations. So if I know someone in a rural community and I have a chance, I want to talk to them about something, and if they're intrigued by it, because I honestly believe that it's quite crazy that there are young people who don't know the future or what the government is subjecting us to. So when I let them know that, it starts more and more. So it's like almost like this chain of conversations that keep on happening. And by that, we draw in more and more people. And yeah, baby steps, I guess.
Yeah, I saw there were a few other people who had something else to add. I like this idea of Yakanis of reaching out to those we know in rural communities and building from there. I don't know if there were other ideas that come from the collective movement. So it's like Yakani just covered all of you. Yeah, Sarah?
Yeah, as you say, Yakani mostly covered it. Last year we had a live, and one of the questions that came through was, how can we spread the message of climate change and what climate justice is if social media isn't really big in your community? And we were talking about the idea of newsletters, and I thought that would be really cool if in the future, like future plans for the collective, we draft newsletters explaining what is happening, and even using the climate justice charter as a tool and sending it out to those communities, and then having in-person conversations, obviously post-COVID, and communicating the issue and building up solutions in those communities. Yeah, I think that would also be helpful and a cool way to bridge the gap.
It does seem like you've thought a lot about these kind of questions, because there's lots of people living in areas without access to adequate internet and online resources. So I agree that post-COVID, it would make a lot of sense that you could actually physically take resources around the country and start to bridge those information gaps. We have another question from Munira, who says, what exactly would a joint African climate movement look like? What links to decolonization can we make?
Oh, I can. Well, I've actually dreamt about this quite a bit. I've thought about this a lot, because I think because of how important it is for us, like as a continent, to sort of unite. I know we talk about like African unity so much. Like I think it's so I would imagine it as like bridging, as we said, bridging the sort of communication gap between countries, because it's very difficult to obviously communicate with other African countries with that don't have as much resources as South Africa, for example, in terms of like online communities and talking online. I think it'd be very. I imagine it as I imagine something similar to the African Union, but sort of separated from the sort of governmental understanding. I think if we can have like, I could call it like one super big like youth movement connected through at least one person online, and they connect their community in a different country like Uganda, for example, and we can sort of form like, we can have really big like continental like actions, physical actions at least, where we can show like Africa is very vital to save within the climate crisis. So I think also sort of sending a huge message to Western countries who constantly sort of come into African countries and I guess strip African countries of their resources, and it'd send a message of African unity that we're not a continent that can just be stripped of our resources for the sake of Western benefits or imperialism, basically. I think Munir says it doesn't have to be institutional. Yeah, it definitely doesn't have to be institutional at all. We can definitely just have like a sort of communication thing where we can talk to one another and form these much bigger movements simply through communication, as we said earlier. and we can have these much bigger physical interactions.
It sounds to me, Les, and I mean, I'll let you add now, Natalie, from what we've been discussing this entire webinar, is we're at the stage in our climate movement here in South Africa that is information-based. We're trying to give people more information about what the climate justice crisis looks like, what we can do about it, and that includes solidarity with fellow African countries, solidarity with people living in rural communities. It seems the focus for a lot of us right now is information, and how do we get information to people who have been excluded from it for so long. So I suppose maybe not institutional, but definitely informational. So yeah, you wanted to add something, Natalie?
Sorry, yeah, when Liz was talking, I just got reminded, so them and I have been speaking for quite a while now about how like frustrating it is that all of our activism has moved online, and also more about getting involved with other African countries. And I think like, even though like we have plans in the future, but as Yakani said, we're already doing stuff now. So we have like networks of African climate activists all over Africa. You know, we've got friends in Uganda, Kenya, and we've worked on things before, like together. And when we have action days, like we'll support each other. So I'm really like stoked to see that grow. But I think one of the problems now, as Les and I have been talking about, is that because of COVID, everything is online, and there's very little you can rarely achieve when it's like online. Like you can't get that same like mass mobilization and the same governmental pressure when you're, you know, like online. You know, you need to actually be out on the streets and you need to be like shouting at the governmental buildings, because otherwise they're not going to notice you. And I think specifically the problem in Africa, and I just want to link this to what Munira was talking about, you know, the process of decolonization, how intrinsic that is to an African climate justice movement. I mean, the kind of entrenched systemic issues we see in Africa, we don't see in Europe, we don't see in the Americas. You know, it's something completely unique to South Africa, to Africa, and it's something that the climate movement in Africa needs to align itself around. And I mean, when we've been talking to the other, you know, African activists, we've spoken about this. We've spoken about how leadership in government is a problem because of the relationship with the West, because of the dependency on neocolonialism, and all of those like different issues, and how it actually prevents Africa from saying, hey, we're not going to stand for this. We're going to like stop doing our coal mining. We're going to be able to rebuild our infrastructure, you know, in a renewable way, in a sustainable way. And yeah, so, I mean, I think as Les was saying, like an African climate justice movement would, I mean, it's already started and I think it's going to grow a lot, but I think this online, you know, adjustment is just harming it so much. And I cannot wait to get back out on the streets, Les. We've been talking about this for so long, but yeah, I'm so stoked to just like shout at some politicians, man. But yeah.
Could I ask you then, Natalie, you know, since we're likely going to be online for a while, especially fellow African countries, with the kind of crisis we're experiencing with vaccination. If you saw the recent news, they've even halted the J&J vaccination now. Given that we probably won't be out on the streets, you know, normalized for quite a while, you know, I know you've constantly told me the challenges. Is there any way to overcome this? Is there any way that the youth climate movement in South Africa can still do something meaningful online?
You know what? I think we have been overcoming this for a year. You know, ACA, even down, mostly based in the Cape, we've worked a bit with them as well. And we've kind of both taken the same sort of steps towards. We've had like online conferences with different, like Greenpeace has helped out a lot, 350 Org has helped out a lot with like online conferences to keep us mobilized, to help us educate ourselves. And I think that we have overcome it already. You know, we're keeping active on social media, we're creating awareness on social media, we're like having conversations with other people on social media. But the problem isn't like the overcoming of that, it's the actual activists, like ourselves, like we're exhausted of being online. And yeah, so it's like we've like strategically, I think we've overcome it nicely. I think we're doing a great job, guys. But it's just emotionally, it's taken quite a toll. I think everyone's just, it's very stressful doing things online, and I don't know, it's a completely different world. But I think we just got to remember to take breaks as well in terms of activism, so we don't burn out. Breaks are, and to keep our passion, that's the other thing. We have to keep passionate about like how, because we're here because we care about this problem, and we care about the fact that we can't let government officials like let greed steer their lives and like not understand that, hey, they actually have an impact on our future, intergenerational justice, So I think we have overcome it, and we just got to find ways to keep ourselves passionate. And yeah.
Speaking about these challenges, I mean, you're all very young, you're either in school or university. How has being so active in the climate justice sphere affected your academics? Is that a challenge? Is it challenging to juggle both of these things?
Wow. No, it's I want to be so inspirational and be like, it's a wonderful life. It's not. It is really exhausting. And it's a very heavy burden to constantly have to face and acknowledge the fact that there's a huge threat to our existence that's growing, and everybody keeps on treating it like it's a long-term issue. So like just trying to get through school and academics, oftentimes I find myself questioning over and over, like, what am I doing? Like, what are we doing here? Why am I doing what I'm doing when I know that 5 years, 10 years down the line, mass catastrophe might take place? So it's like you have just like I want to say, like, I'm having like a life crisis right now. And the activism burnout, I think people underrate how much that activism burnout really carries on to like other things. You just find yourself not being able to take in other stuff or pay attention to anything else, because your mind is just constantly drained and information overload. So yeah, like Natalie was saying, it's very important to take a break, and not only to take a break, but to allow yourself to have just like at least 3 main issues, just to channel your energy enough, so you're not just opening way too many tabs in your head and giving too much energy to way too many things.
Yeah, I can definitely relate with this, the struggles of being an activist, of juggling the various aspects of your lives. I want to ask a bit about large organizations. Natalie mentioned a bit earlier about 350 Africa, ACA, Greenpeace. Your article mentions Fridays for Future and the Sunrise Movement. How has it been being a youth movement working with larger organizations? Are they able to help you with resources? Some of these are international organizations. Do they actually understand, African contexts, South African contexts? Are these international youth movements or international environmental movements doing enough to help out in Global South with the kind of resources they have available to them? So I guess fundamentally, what's it been like working with other environmental organizations?
I think it's been really motivating and inspiring surrounding yourself with big organizations full of people as passionate about you to solve an issue. It almost like lights a sense of hope that there's like people on your side that are working with you. And I think with the most organizations that were mentioned in the article, like such as 350.org, they do take quite an African approach to the issue that we're facing. And I think that's also why it's so important to have branches from different countries. So like there's Greenpeace Africa and 350.org Africa that understand and like climate change from a South African context. So their solutions are South African centered, which I think is really useful and really needed in the movement.
Tavira, I see you're joining us again on the call. I just want to ask you, specifically, what makes you become involved as a young person in this movement? How do other young people get involved with the collective movement or with any form of environmental movement? If I'm a young person watching this webinar, what are some of the things that I should do to get more involved? Where should I go to find resources, to get assistance or help? Let's say I haven't been involved in this at all. What's the first thing that I should do?
Hi. So I think the one thing to understand about the people in the climate justice movement is that we're all really nice. We're all really welcoming. and we're all really happy to answer questions. So if there's anyone who ever wants to join, I think the simplest thing, just reaching out via a social media DM, liking a picture, leaving a comment on our Instagram post, because we're all really young, we're all really involved with social media, we're very likely to get back to you very quickly. And I think the other thing is just to have a very strong passion for networking. So I think the most important thing when you're young is the ability to make relationships with new people, to start conversations, and to let those people introduce you to their networks and to the people they know. And that's definitely how a lot of us got involved. So that's how I got involved. I got involved with this because I knew Natalie, and Natalie knew the organization. Natalie knew lots of other organizations. And in that way, I now know tens and tens of climate activists. I now know so many organizations, and I think all of them teach me something different. And because the climate organization movement is so broad, the other thing I want to highlight is that there's definitely a place for everyone. So if you think that there's something you're specifically passionate about, or if you have a specific skill that you think is needed, there's definitely place for that. And I think it'll be really easy for people to get involved.
Yeah, I've put the Instagram and the Twitter details in the chat. It's at the Collective Movement, movement spelled MVMT, at the Collective Movement on Instagram. And on Twitter, it's just Collective Movement. This time, movement spelled MVT, Collective Movement. So you can just reach out to them, they've said. Just send them a DM. I believe as young people, we're really well versed with social media. It would be really great to see a lot more young people across the country joining in. And, as I think it was Yakani who mentioned earlier that, what we're working toward is to make sure that 10 years from now, we don't face a huge climate catastrophe. So before we close off this webinar, I just want to give you an opportunity to add anything. Is there any kind of message of hope, call to action that you'd like to give out to young people or older people, decision makers who are listening?
I'll start. I definitely think this is, sometimes I do feel like we're in a sort of, COVID has really put me mentally in a sort of activism, mental slump. But I do still have the sort of passion and hope that we can achieve so much and, get the climate justice that those who need it, need and they deserve. I definitely feel personally, I'm a much better interaction person in person. If we start having proper, I remember beginning of last year when me and Natalie met, we started talking about having school talks, going to different schools around Gauteng at least, and talking about climate, about climate stuff, and bringing up climate justice to schools. And I think those kinds of things can really sort of reinvigorate hope in me properly. So as soon as COVID clears up, and I definitely think it's possible, but I still think there's a lot of hope for us. I think we just need to find it within ourselves a little bit.
Yeah, I just want to add on to what Les is saying. I feel like as True was saying as well, this is such an amazing movement. And it has so, not even potential, we've already done so much internationally as well. The activists we know in Uganda, the activists we know in Kenya, they're all doing so much, so many amazing things, and we're just literally the people who are part of climate justice, maybe my favorite people hands down, people who are really conscientious and people who actually get things done. And it's just watch this space, this movement we've already achieved so much, and not just the collective movement, all climate justice in general, adults as well. We love you guys too. We're gonna do so much. And I mean, if this is the youth that we're gonna have in the future, I'm so stoked, guys. I mean, the climate crisis is kind of scary, not gonna lie, but I'm stoked. I think we're gonna do so many great things. And yeah, just stay supporting us too, because we need a lot of support. So yeah.
Yeah, I also have something to add onto that. Just on a more practical level, on the 22nd of April is Earth Day, and we have a bunch of national Earth Day actions happening all across South Africa. So we have stuff happening in Johannesburg, in Pretoria, in Cape Town. So if anyone is out there who's interested in joining any of those actions, you can just head over to our Instagram You can DM us, we'll find out which action is nearest to you, and we'll put you in contact with the relevant people. And I think that's a cool way that we can let people into the movement and let you guys see firsthand what we do on the front lines.
And I think just to finally add is to not undermine yourself ever, and to advocate for change and take up as much space as you can, because we're all capable of making change, and to join the movement, because as Tariro said, we're very welcoming. We're also ready to take radical action. Yeah.
Oh, well, I suppose, we're all ready to take radical action is the best segue to conclude this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us, Collective Movement, the Collective Movement. Thank you for writing the article in the Daily Maverick. I'd ask everyone to just read the article they've written. It explains a lot of their vision, a lot of the issues that they're fighting against, and how young people are taking a stand against the climate crisis. I ask you again to sign the petition. The link's been shared on the chat. You can find it to help us end thirst, climate harm, hunger, pollution, and climate breakdown here in South Africa, to read and share the Climate Justice Charter, to follow movements like the Collective Movement, but also the Climate Justice Charter Movement South Africa. We are going to have a few more webinars before we finish up our series. I've just shared them here. You'll see on the 29th of April, we're going to have a webinar about the just transition. On the 13th of May, we'll be talking about faith perspectives. On the 27th of May, an assortment of issues, including the rural water crisis. So these are really important topics. You can go onto COPAC SA on YouTube. You can already see the first webinar, which was about renewable energy, which I had with Sunny Morgan. We're going to be putting up the second webinar up very shortly on YouTube as well, and then also releasing some podcasts. Like Tariro mentioned, there are going to be activities across the country on the 22nd. You can follow those activities by contacting the Collective Movement or by contacting the Climate Justice Charter Movement. This is a charter movement which is about social justice, about human justice, about climate justice, about intergenerational justice. And that's the kind of movement we're building together. Thank you everyone for joining this webinar, and I'll see you next time.